Welcome. My name is Paul Doherty. I'm the CEO of the Digit Group, also known as TDG, a real estate development firm in the United States. I'm here to present a new concept of unlocking the metaverse, AI, innovation, and the future of our industry. For those of you that don't know TDG, we have been, actually, I have been called the OG or the original gangster when it comes to BIM. I haven't been part of the Revit team. Before we sold it to Autodesk, we've had a front row seat to such change. It's a pleasure, actually, to be in London, in Dublin, in order to present the next generation of where I think BIM is heading, at least from our perspective and the way that we're using the tool. We've been blessed with being recognized in the mass media for a lot of our innovative work in the form of smart cities developments, where as a real estate developer, we now get to use the technologies and the data that comes from our projects, our construction projects, and be able to use it not just in facility management and operations, but in other uses, which I'll show you today. I come from a background of hand drawing. I was there way before CAD, and I remember being in drafting pools like what you see on the screen. What was interesting about this type of exercise was that there was a hand-me-down process of how work gets done, how buildings are built, how infrastructure is laid. And we learned from people passing by and seeing what was on your sheet and then telling stories back and forth. Unfortunately, through CAD and now into BIM, we've lost a lot of that storytelling, which is why, with the advent of things like large language models, artificial intelligence, and other types of data capturing tools that can speed up processes of finding different ways of repeatable tasks, repeatable best practices, sometimes repeatable lessons learned, we're now in a new age of finally getting back to these hand drafting pools, but done in a digital way so that we're actually looking through the digital information that has been used to build the built environment in order to provide simulation and provide guidance. As I said, being part of the original Revit team, it was a very interesting time because we were introducing 3D as a construction document. We're still trying to move through that entire phase. But what we are seeing is that from the design and construction documents phase now into facility management operations and beyond, we're now looking at this next phase of BIM coordination being beyond the contract. This means that when we look at 3D, I can point back to the mid 90s when I was working with an organization advising them of doing 3D work for the San Francisco Giants baseball team in Major League Baseball here in the US. And what was interesting was that they wanted to communicate what the design intent for this new stadium was going to be in downtown San Francisco. So what you're seeing here are actual screenshots of what we called the metaverse, on how we were able to capture 3D and not actually do a fly through, which is what the technology was the standard of care at that point, where you set off a path and you can actually take people through a story. This was actually put onto the equivalent of a gaming engine today, but was called VRML, a virtual reality markup language inside a browser. And what that allowed was that the individual that was actually looking at the model could actually move through the space, the digital space themselves. This means that there's been a lot of people that have been doing this for a very long time. And it's interesting to watch now how things are being redefined because we're not just talking about the geometry, we're also now talking about the movement of nerves, the equivalent of nerves and blood circulation through these models, through these new tools of data. So when you do hear large language models, things like ChatGPT, blockchain, and other types of tools, this Web3 way of explaining how we're moving into this next phase is the future about where we are going. Um, I'm actually learning from the younger generation. I have two 13-year-old sons, and they really are the natives when it comes to this idea of a digital way of moving through in real life, or IRL as they call it, right? Where this cyber physical relationship is becoming closer and closer and closer, which means that the habits of the past can give way to behaviors of the future. I learn more of how they interoperate, how they socialize, how they use the game as a platform for growth and understanding. sometimes to make fun of each other like kids do. But what I find interesting is that, you know, trying to get them offline sometimes is the wrong thing to do. I always love this little screenshot. Like, you've been online for 1 year. Do you wish to log off and get a life? Well, yeah, kind of, sort of. But what I'm learning is that their social interactions are very similar in real life as when there is in part of a game like a Fortnite or World of Warcraft, things like that. So I've been learning that that gateway to the future, it was really involved around this idea of design as a preferred future. I always like like that term of, a preferred future, because isn't that what gaming is all about? You're getting into this world and you're playing your game, but the game never ends, right? And I think that as we move forward into this gamification of the construction industry with the tools of AI and digital twins and eventually the metaverse, I think that there's more non-changes that are going to happen as opposed to changes, meaning that the internet brought us connections between data and people, people and people. But now this whole idea of between people, data, and the physical environment brings apart this idea of a spatial computing world, where we now have this fourth utility called ICT, or information communications technology, that is just as important now as power and plumbing and HVAC. So the conditioning of the air, the movement of electricity, and the movement of water through a building has been great for the past 100 years. But now we have this new one where data flows through the building. And this idea then of being able to geolocate it, not in plan, but in 3D, this gives a whole new idea to this concept called the Internet of Things, or IoT, where even cameras, surveillance cameras and CCTV cameras, that's all data. It's just that that's showing imagery as opposed to occupancy. But all of this creates this spatial computing platform that is giving rise to, well, we need to manage this better, which is why the rise of digital twins is here to stay. This idea that BIM can be the digital DNA to the built environment and then create these worlds, right, that people can actually move through and start to manage their facilities even better, right? So this idea that the gamification of that becomes a mechanism for how we can storytell how to manage buildings better, right? And also build them better. And again, through being able to have that instinctual knowledge come out through your captured DNA, your digital DNA, the data that actually your firm either uses or creates. This is this whole new game, or this whole new world where we have terms that are part of gaming that are now starting to infiltrate into the actual world of construction. So a case in point would be this. On our projects, we're experimenting right now where we are taking a literal translation of gamification, that the job site is a game that never ends, just like Fortnite. That game never ends, right? Your participation in it, either by yourself or with your friends, is when you enter the game and then when you leave, but the game is always there. Same thing in construction. So when we start to take a look at how we can start to create digital imagery of ourselves so that when I physically leave the job site, my avatar actually takes over and does very simple things like reconciliation, where there are injuries on the job site, workman's comp issues. Can the paperwork be done? Is the delivery of my materials and or equipment the next day on time? The things that I take a lot of time in the morning when I first open up the job site is now taken care of, so I can focus in on more important things. So this is where I'm fond of saying, the gamification of the construction industry, by taking the gaming metaphor, it means that when we start to use tools like AI, it allows us to be more human, meaning that it takes care of the mundane, it takes care of that repeatable stuff that just takes up time, and allows us to have conversations, allows us to have discussions at a much higher level, hopefully inspiring and leading us to new insights about how we interact with each other as people, how we interact with the project itself, and then actually simulate how we can actually get through to the other side. So this is where, this idea of authentic and artificial intelligence comes into play. This is our generation's greatest change agent. But what it does, it adds in some complexities to how we operate as humans. And one of those would be this idea that AI never forgets, where, in our world, of course we forget, because that's how we cope. That's, stressful situations, crises, things like that. In order to move on, we choose to forget certain parts of our existence, but AI will not let us forget that. So that's going to be a huge challenge for us. But as we are navigating through these great waters, AI is that currency of complexity. It can actually filter through, although it doesn't forget, but we can actually teach it to be not too perfect. Add a human element in there so that we can actually work with AI so that it's a seamless way of using computers in ways that we've never had before, meaning that we can create experiences. And a friend of mine, Joe Pine, an author of The Experience Economy, says that we're moving from an economy of scale to an economy of scope. That's a huge, big shift because now we can actually, again, manage the idea that we have levels of experience, levels of engagement now, because we are taking the data and having a different type of relationship with it. I'm also fond of saying that, as you start to learn how to interface with these types of tools, the growth and your ability to use the tool better is actually called prompt engineering. How you structure, how you have a conversation with the AI. It can be assigning roles, it can be specifying a scenario, provide the model even additional information, because that's all it is. These are models that are based on probability, meaning that it's not definitive. You can't just say, well, AI knows, because they're taking a lot of our learned knowledge and our biases and then repeating it back to us. But what it can do for now, and the AI's best use, is to manage AI. So now when you start seeing people using code, well, that's a very good way of using AI because again, it takes that repeatability, the prompts that you're asking the machine to perform for you, and it's doing away with the mundane, the just the busy work that goes along with that type of function. But what I like about AI also is that it can actually work in the world of imagery. What you're seeing here is screenshots from a technology platform called Discord. And there's a technology that sits on top of it called Midjourney. And I've been using this and having a lot of fun, only because you use prompts in order to elicit imagery. This gets me about 60% there, 65% there when I'm going through a design shred. Guess what? That just saved me 60, 65% amount of my time, which means as I prompt what I want out of the machine, it gives me about 4 different scenarios initially. And then I can go in and iterate, right, about further prompting, further prompting. It's like sharpening a sword. So this is what a prompt looks like. In this case, in Midjourney, the command is /imagine, and then you put your prompt in. What I wanted to see was, well, I want to see myself as Batman. And this is what it gave me. Sometimes AI is not kind. But what's fun about it is that if you remember the first time you ever started to use a web browser and you were looking for a very specific thing, and 4 hours later you were like in some other la la land, right? Because it was just so interesting as you start to get into the information. Very, very similar thing will happen here because your imagery and how you prompt it, you self-learn and the machine learns at the same time. So this means that, when we start taking a look at how does this help in the processes of, well, design, well, pre-design, design, pre-construction, construction, facility management, and operations, this is where I'm going to reiterate that these tools, the digital twins, the AI, even blockchain, start to help with defining the spatial computing world, meaning that the physical way of how you capture data in a 3D environment, like a building, can be then shown and managed and scenarioed in ways that we haven't had before. So, a friend of mine, Richard Boyd, has coined the term that we are in the simulation century. We're going to be able to see things that decisions that you make, the compound effects, you can now start to model and start to maybe rethink, was that the right approach? Was that the best pathway of moving forward? This changes design completely because now you have to think about everything. I'm fond of a quote by Leonardo da Vinci that said, I'm learning how to see again. I'm realizing that everything is connected to everything. And if that's the case, we're only scratching the surface of what we think are the spaces that we create as the built environment, because now you're talking about human interaction, not just with the building itself, but imagine if the building had personality. So a friend of mine, um, uh, Eric Liu, actually showcased this as spatial twins, where he's able to take a lot of this information when it comes to the management of the world's most popular airport, which is Changi Airport in Singapore. What he shows is that this idea of unifying the space through a digital interface becomes a very good and efficient way of managing the world's most popular airport. So what I'm going to do is speed up over here and start to show that when you have different data silos, in the case of Changi, there's 16 different management systems that all have to interoperate and connect together. And each one of those could be passenger management. It could be dealing with the navigation, wayfinding. It could be security, like in the case of the U.S., the TSA. The management of the airplanes. The management of flight crews. All these different things all interoperate. And what has been interesting is watching when you start to pull these all together into a single model, and it interfaces with the physical world, amazing things start to happen. Such as we can start to take a look at how at Changi the duty free area can be optimized for the retailers and food and beverage folks just by looking at the captured information, running analytics, right? Especially in places like, well, like a Bulgari, luxury brand type of shop, and show things like heat maps of how many people are passing through that store and where you should optimize and actually place your products so that they're seen better. Very, very insightful ways of using data that come from design and construction information. So again, I think this epiphany that we're having is that the digital DNA of the built environment are the construction documents that every one of you works on every day. What gets interesting is now watching how others are using this as a way to more or less create virtual worlds so that they can get greater insight into either the use of the space, the management of the space, and the operations of those spaces. This, as a design tool, and as a designer, I actually love this new world that we're exploring because we can actually get in front of it through simulations and control the physical environment through the digital interface. So what I'm going to do is also show you where this is going for the next couple of minutes here. And it is through this interface called the Metaverse. And the Metaverse is a great way of explaining how we can move from digital twins into virtual worlds and finally into this immersive place that is only emerging. But it means that we have to change our mindset from levels of detail into levels of engagement. So how you do that is actually through avatars. And what I love is how the avatars are moving from pixelated, cartoonish type of figures into motion and reality capture of creating a deep fake of yourself. Which means, as I mentioned about having the gamification of a construction site, we now have mechanisms in place that allow us to take our personalities, our decision making, and through machine learning, meaning repeatability, that avatar can actually take on my decision making, my look, my actions, and my personality. So as we move forward, with AI, I do think that human connection is amplified and that we are the creators of this new future, which means that we're moving quickly to this word called singularity, meaning that it's a future point in which technology growth becomes almost uncontrollable and irreversible, but it results in consequences for us as humans that we can control it and actually be one with the technology. So this idea of a hybrid way of having human existence happen is being seen in projects that we're working on. The singularity approach of having the world of the mega projects going on in Saudi Arabia is probably best personified in this particular project called the New Maraba. So I wanted to show this that we're doing fantastical type of work, but we're blending the world of digital experience along with the physical state itself. This is meant to be a gateway to the future of how humans are going to interoperate and actually have relationships with the built environment all based on our construction documents. I can't stress that enough. Another project that we are working on is actually in South Korea that's taking this approach of production, TV, film, metaverse, avatar creation, that in South Korea, we're creating a studio city that's going to help with the publications of these things. So with that, I'd like to close out by saying, we have a lot of concepts, a lot of really good examples. If you take a look at Amazon, I have two books that were released last year. One's called Smart Cities, Reimagining the Urban Experience, along with Unlocking the Metaverse, a strategic guide for the future of the built environment, published by John Wiley and Sons. I also run a podcast. You can use a QR code there called Elevated Business with my partner, Marbu Dennis. And with that, I'd like to thank Ralph and the entire team of the BIM Coordinators Summit for hosting me here. And I look forward to getting questions and hopefully provide some answers up on social media. Thank you very much.